Elizabeth L. Cheney, for putting the American people over party.
The fuck is that? Shit!
The fuck are you doing?
I hope you guys didn't catch that yesterday because it's probably funnier the first time because I didn't change it. I liked that one too much, and since we're pretty much going over the same topic, because I'll just summarize the summary in case you guys didn't read it. The title is still pretty good. I like it enough to keep it too. So, but basically, if you guys missed out what happened yesterday, which I kind of hope you did, honestly, it was a real, just a like a nightmare that just came up out of nowhere. Essentially, I got stuck in the middle of something last minute that was coming before the show. I had something I had to do after the show, but because I was pressed for time, I was trying to hurry with the first thing. I got back, and I had a couple issues that held me up and made me start really late. And then I was... By that point, I was already so stressed that I was like leaking energy so fast. I don't know even how I was gonna even how I thought I was even gonna do the show at all. But it became very apparent as I was doing the stream that I was very, very quickly getting into a state of exhaustion. I wasn't gonna last very long. But as I looked up immediately, shortly after I was realizing this, I was like, oh man, it's getting already to the point where I'm gonna have to call it pretty soon anyway. And then I just kind of figured, well, you know what? This whole thing is too good of an episode. There's too much to discuss. It's too important, and it's too interesting. And honestly, there's a lot of things about it that I haven't seen talked about anywhere. And I'm kind of disappointed about that. And I figured, why not? How about I do it? Because this information should be out there. And it's... granted, it is something I've only seen on Rumble, I think, and maybe I saw it on YouTube, but it wasn't from... It's something on Tucker's show. It was an interview he did about 2 months ago, and a lot of good information about it's in there, but I've only seen it a couple times, and the main time was on Tucker's show on Rumble, so I figured, well, nobody's talking about that element to it. How about I bring it up? So ultimately, originally I kind of mentioned yesterday I was going to just picked up where I left off, but then when I realized that I had to fly out the door and hurry up and get to the next thing I was supposed to be at, and I was just like, I barely made it through that as well. I got back and I was thinking, hey, I should just redo that whole episode, and I'd already taken it off public, so I figured, okay, well, you know what, this is one of those times where I do apologize again, but I swear I tried to do these things ahead of time before I started doing the streams and hopefully a podcast soon. I'll probably start mentioning those plans sometime soon, because this was originally my idea. I wasn't even thinking of doing live streams at first, but it kind of became obvious that would be the better route to start with. But ultimately, there was ideas to do a podcast, and I just kind of... for some reason that was on my mind while I was working on this today. So, but I haven't really talked about it yet. Maybe we'll touch on that today, maybe not, but that I'll be touching on it at least in the near future. But either way, it was something that I had mentioned as I started doing the show that there's going to be people around that I was potentially going to need favors from when I was needing to go live soon, or something like that, and it just completely bailed on me in that moment where I really, really needed it the most. And so I got basically put in a very tough spot where I had no choice but to do something and try and hurry. And then by the time I got back, I was already a little behind. I already wasn't done clipping everything. In fact, I was only about halfway done clipping all the video clips I needed to get ready for the show. I still had to get those ready. I still had to obviously get all the actual stuff ready for the show that was going to be going live. And then I started the show, and then I realized, oh, good Lord, I need to go, and I'm not even going to have enough time to do my normal length show. So I'm going to have to do this fast. And by that point, I was so stressed out and so it was just a nightmare. So the whole thing just fell apart, and I was so exhausted already. I was already in that mode where I was barely even able to focus on what I was doing. It was a mess. So I don't feel as bad about it as the last few times, where it's just kind of more irresponsibility that put me there, as opposed to something that, like, I had to do something. Otherwise, there was not going to be another chance to do everything we needed to do yesterday, and be able to make it to today without, and then there was no guarantee that I was going to have time today to do it either. Anyway, long story short, it was just a really big mess, and so I just figured, what the hell, I'll just do it all today. So I hope you guys like it, because it's something, like I said, I really think either way, it's important that this gets out, because nobody's touching on it. Everybody's talking about it. So, well, by the title, I'm sure you can guess this has to do with Liz Cheney, and there's a couple things that have been recent in the news. One has been the older one that's been going back for a while, but it's been talked about again now suddenly a little bit more frequently, is that Trump has been talking about everyone on the January 6th committee being investigated for some sort of corruption and some sort of lying to the American people, some sort of whatever it is that they can find as a way to because there's no secret at all that the whole point of the hearings was to make President Trump less likely to even run for president in 2024, let alone win. So it didn't really work out for him too well. But more importantly, it was to just give them the excuses they needed to keep the narrative going that January 6th was this terrible, horrible day in American history, where it wasn't just a simple riot that got out of hand. It wasn't just simply people that were there to exercise free speech, where there were some people that inevitably in those situations will do some bad things. No, it was a situation where they wanted to make sure that not only was it something they highlighted as this horrible, terrible stain on American history, they have gone so far even to label it as up there with 9/11 and Pearl Harbor in terms of how terrible it is. It's such a disgrace to actual tragedies that have happened in American history, by saying that, an event where one protester got shot by a Capitol Police officer, some Capitol Police officers got wounded by protesters, and there's reports of other protesters being killed. I haven't heard anyone confirm that officially, but a lot of people have said that there were several people, including a woman who got trampled to death. And then there's all kinds of other things that happened, and not least of which that anybody who was even in Washington, D.C. that day, who flew in, potentially as being there to protest the election, is someone that the FBI has looked into, and many of them have been visited by the FBI to ask them a bunch of questions about, were you on the lawn, did you go in the Capitol, and if any of those answers are yes, even if they're just on the lawn, not in the restricted area, if they're anywhere near the Capitol, as a matter of fact, a lot of them have been arrested and charged and put in prison for years and years, and they've been sitting there rotting away for nothing more than, there was one lady I heard discuss that she was standing near one of the broken windows in the Capitol. She didn't break it. She was walking around outside the building, and she was walking near one of the broken windows, and somebody bumped her or pushed her or ended up just basically knocked her into the open window. And one of the Capitol police officers helped her to her feet and said, "Ma'am, you can't be in the building, though. You have to leave." And she, of course, got up and decided, obviously decided to that she, okay, I'll leave. Then she walked out. She ended up getting later charged and put in prison. And she was like 69, 70 years old, 72 years old, had breast cancer, and now she was being put in prison for 2 years because she got shoved into a window and was standing in the Capitol for 60 seconds. That's the kind of, but it's because of how, this was an insurrection. Might I remind you that not one person, not Donald Trump, not any of the Oath Keepers, not even the guy who was the president or whatever the name officially is of the head of the Proud Boys, not even he was charged with insurrection. They threw the book at him, but they didn't charge him with insurrection. Not one person. Not Donald Trump, not any of the people on January 6th, no one in prison for January 6th. Not one of them even got a charge in their litany of charges that were against them. Not one of them was charged with insurrection. So for the whole narrative about how this was an insurrection to overthrow the government and prevent the peaceful transfer of power, yeah, no, you're full of shit. If it was, why wouldn't they bring charges? It seems like you guys are so certain it's obvious that was what happened. No, that's not what happened. Everyone knows that's not what happened. Even the people saying that that's what happened, that didn't happen. But in particular, one of the more important talking points that people bring up in reference to the hearing in particular, which, by the way, the reason I refer to this as I refer to it as January 6th committee hearing, and I refer to it as a January 6th television miniseries, is because, first of all, I've watched tons of House committee hearings, and this wasn't a House committee hearing. Not one aspect of it resembled a House committee hearing. This was a made-for-TV segment that you would see on MSNBC or CNN that was there to push a narrative, pure and simple. That was what it was for. It was to push a narrative about Donald Trump being an evil threat to our democracy and threat to our system, and should never be allowed to be near power again, and yada yada. So there's that, along with the fact that I'm also that when you have hearings like this, there's supposed to be the minority leader who also nominates members from the minority that he wants or she wants to sit on the committee as well, so that it's also got members from both sides on the committee and they can all ask questions. Well, that's not how this one worked either. Nancy Pelosi decided no. Who actually, it was, wasn't it? Kevin McCarthy was leader of the House, the House minority at the time. And it's like, nope, you can't have anybody on the committee that you want. I'm gonna decide what members of the minority are on. And lo and behold, who do we get? We get Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. We get the crazy, insane daughter of another insane, crazy warmonger. And then we get the manifestation of feminine masculinity, like basically the most crying, whining little bitch on Adam Kinzinger. I can't believe that they have him on shows as a serious opinion to be platforming on places like CNN and MSNBC. That, like, the guy, the funniest part is they highlight these people that got voted out, not by anything crazy going on, by the people that put them in power to begin with, that voted them out because they recognized, yeah, no, you're not representing anything that I care about. You're not doing the job that I was hoping you were going to do. You're gone. that's how senators are elected, by the people in their district, and the people in those districts said no ixnay on these two, and they left with acting like, well, I did what I thought was right. Well, your constituents sure as hell didn't think it was right, and that's the measure by which anybody in Congress should be measured by, is how well did you serve your constituents, and according to them, you didn't serve them any kind of well at all. Like, the way you served them was by basically acting like jackasses and obsessing over Trump the whole time. That didn't really... Oh, yeah, and crying when you heard about the bravery of the Capitol Hill police. Except for that guy, Steven's son. Yeah, that guy's a bastard. It's his fault for all of this, even though really Nancy Pelosi was the one that was denying the National Guard be brought out. And I heard a story from Steven's son that I hadn't heard until recently, that the police officers from New Jersey that had heard the radio calls going out, they actually made it trying to help assist the Capitol Police before the National Guard had been able to reach the Capitol. It's so stupid. Like, they had actually the local New Jersey Police Department was able to mobilize and get to Washington, D.C. and get to the Capitol to assist the Capitol Police officers faster than the National Guard was. Because no matter what Nancy Pelosi and Benny Thomas and Chuck Schumer and Benny Thompson, not Thomas, sorry, no matter what they say, they were the ones that held up the National Guard, because they're the ones who have control over the House Sergeant at Arms and the Senate Sergeant at Arms, and those three characters, along with the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, at the time. Those are the people in charge of deploying the National Guard after it's been approved by the president, which, by the way, that was done 3 days before January 6th. 3 days before January 6th, Trump approved of the Capitol Police being assisted by the National Guard in case things got out of hand. So everybody that blames Trump for all this, they never bring that part up, but it's absolutely a fact. There were several people in the room at the time, including the incoming, hopefully, new FBI Director, Kash Patel. But yeah, that was not done by Trump. That wasn't done by anybody associated with Trump. That was done by Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Muriel Bowser for the most part. I think that the House and Senate Sergeant at Arms were kind of... I don't know why they went along with what they went along with. I have to assume that there was something, because they did give conflicting testimony to everything that Steven's son gave, and you can tell by when you see Steven's son actually discuss this event, you can tell he's tormented still by it. Like, he still thinks on it, and he still thinks, wow, this was just... Not only were my men under my command and I'm supposed to be looking out for these guys, not were they completely just caught off guard and thrown to the wolves and basically treated like essentially like they were willing to be sacrificed. Despite whatever nice words they might say about the ones that come forward, they only say that about the ones that come out and say something negative about Trump. They don't care at all about the DC Metropolitan Police Department. They don't care about them. They don't care about the police chief. They don't care that they fired Steven's son like right after this happened. And the guy's obviously an honorable freaking police officer. He was trying to do the best that he could under the circumstances that he was working under, and this is going on for hours and hours. And I think the first reports were around 1 or 1:30, I think, was when it first started really getting kind of noticeably out of hand. And I know that according to everything I've heard about the events of the day, the actual National Guard appearing on site at the Capitol, that didn't happen until after 6 p.m., which is ridiculous. I mean, that's just an absolute joke. And then, of course, they'd be praised, of course, for the wonderful job they did, which really, in all actuality, all they did was kind of, and by that point, they had been taken under control, and just about everything was back in a state where everything was in regular, or could go back to regular order. But it's just like, not to keep going down the rabbit hole about January 6th. I don't want to talk about that the whole time. Just to refresh about a few of the important details there. That's every single event that happened on that day has been looked at several times now, and it is hard to come to any other conclusion than in some way, no matter what actually transpired, things that went according to plan, things that didn't go according to plan, things that were there as potential backup plans, which is what I think of what the pipe bombs were, because the events surrounding those are too conspicuous, and we'll go over those hopefully at some point, but that's not what we're talking about today. So essentially, there was, everything that they were hoping for was in place, ready to go. And it's just, there's no other way to say it. It was, by any objective measure of the situation, there as a PR move by the Democrats to make the MAGA movement and Trump voters in particular look as bad as possible, to paint Trump in as negative a light as possible, and to basically ignore or hide anything that was to the contrary of that, like Trump, approving the National Guard, like how he said peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard, like how Democrats have been holding up. Talk about interrupting or interfering with the peaceful transfer of power, or holding up the results of a free and fair election. Let's talk about 2016, 2004, and 2000. Or, well, I guess it'd be 2001, 2005, and 2017, I guess, in this case. Because those were all the years where the Republican candidates had won. And I've said before, I'm no fan of George Bush. I'm not a fan at all of George Bush. I think his presidency was one of those very stereotypical neocon presidencies where everything was about war, and everything was about getting involved in all these different foreign conflicts for the financial benefits that were going to go along with it, and it had nothing to do with the attack on the World Trade Center and Islamic extremism. It had to do with rich oil reserves that existed in the Middle East, and in particular with Iraq. That was something stupid as hell, because Iraq was one of the countermeasures to Iran, and now that didn't exist, that gave Iran all the running room in the world they needed to keep expanding in ways they couldn't before. It just led to disaster, and it was based on partly that, but also I think there was partly a grudge there, because after George Bush Sr.'s first term, and he only was elected for one term, but after his presidency, there was some, unresolved business, I think, that where, Saddam Hussein had essentially said made some threats against George H.W. Bush, and I think that when it came down to that family and being threatened by someone in Iraq, especially some 2-bit dictator of this very poor country like Iraq, that was just a tyranny. Obviously there's no other way to describe it. But at the same time, I think that it wasn't really noble. I think it was more also out of this little petty spite that he had, that all these nasty things had been said, threats had been made by Saddam Hussein against his dad. He even said on this one statement he made one time, "This is after all the guy that tried to kill my dad." It's just like, Yeah. So that's why you have such bitter resentment. I don't think it really has anything to do with the idea that they are harboring known terrorists. It's like, you know, because there's still the matter of the actual known terrorists that we're talking about. You seem to be more angry at the people that are harboring the known terrorists than the known terrorists. So why don't we get to those first? But it was just so anyway. The point is that, regardless, I can say, looking back on the scenario, it seems pretty obvious, looking in hindsight, that yeah, whether I like him or not, he did win those elections, pure and simple. And yet the Democrats did the same thing in that election as they did in the first Trump term, and I expect them to do again in a few days when they go to certify Trump's second term, which is they will go up to the mic and I'll have these whatever the hell they're called when they're just in the House. They're like basically letters to not confirm a president of the United States based on concerns of either election-related concerns or concerns about that president going into office or whatever it might be. Last time it was about how there was unfair ballot, which is hilarious that they would get away with that. And once again, you suggest there's anything quirky going on with the ballots when the Democrats run, even though, you know, you can't show voter ID anymore. You're even not supposed to show voter ID in California. You're going to be arrested if you even show voter ID, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. But yeah, it's like that. You don't need voter ID. You don't need proof of citizenship. You don't need to prove you haven't voted. Almost, it seems like in some jurisdictions, you'll be sent a absentee ballot, and you can just show up at the polls and vote. In a lot of, I mean, the election integrity issue is something that definitely needs to be tackled this presidency. But anyway, to go back to the points, this is what happened in all three of these situations. Three times, a Republican president has been elected. Every single time, they did the same thing. They came up one by one to the mic, even though they knew for a fact that when you have this kind of protest to the election, you have to, number one, you have to have signatures of a certain number of members of the House of Representatives, and you also have to have at least one senator sign off on the note. Never in the history of this entire process has there ever been a senator that signed off on the protest, on the objection. The senators kind of seem to know better. It's a smaller chamber with less members, but it's also because they know the consequences will be much more stern if they just side with a frivolous case that's by some angry people in the House of Representatives. So they're much more skeptical of doing something kind of crazy like that to put their neck out there for something like this. So they never have what they need, but yet they'll go one by one, like over and over. And I watched this when Gore had to do it, which was interesting because this time it's going to be Kamala Harris. It's going to have to be in that position because she's the vice president. The vice president has to preside over the vote count or the certification. Excuse me. In 2001, it was Gore who was vice president to Bill Clinton, and he had to essentially he had to go along with the Democrats as they one by one came up and said that he was actually the winner, and they signed off on this paper, and he had to once again ask them every single time, do you have a senator whose sign is that? They would all say, nope. So they all knew that they had to have that before they came up to the mic. But they didn't care. They just wanted to waste time. So what's my point? My point is, if you want to talk about holding up the peaceful transfer of power and contesting the results of a free and fair election and causing potentially damage to our faith in our election system, look no further than those 3 years when it just happens that Republicans won. Because every single time they have something to say about that. But when it's them that wins, oh, how dare you? How dare you suggest that this was the most free and fair election in history, and we don't have any proof of that. We can't, go back in time and look at the vote count and look at the how by some measure that is undefined, how to define it as free and fair, and then by that metric come up with a percentage of how free and fair it was, and compare that to every single year that we've ever had an election. And the statement is so stupid. It's so stupid, and yet they always repeat it. And then also the whole stupid thing about interrupting the peaceful transfer of power. But you guys sure didn't mind doing that either when it suited your side. You didn't mind about holding up the peaceful transfer of power. And in fact, if that's the metric, then once again, I mean, that's what senators are supposed to do to some degree. They're supposed to make sure everything's in order before they certify something as important as, the election of a goddamn president of the United States. So anyway, it's just, like everything else, it's hypocrisy after hypocrisy after hypocrisy. Non-stop. It just goes on and on and on and on. So where am I going with this? Well, we've been led to believe that uniquely there's this terrible thing with January 6th. There is some kind of grain of truth to that. But now that we find out that the FBI had confidential human sources that were among the crowd, they say it was 27 or so. I say that I'm much more inclined to believe the senators who have come out and said that it's in the hundreds. I also don't believe them because they've changed their story already a couple of times. Where, well, no, they were only on the lawn. Well, no, they actually went in some of the restricted areas. Well, no, they a lot of them went in the restricted areas, and it's like, come on. So how far is it that we get till we hear confirmation that, yeah, they were also inside the Capitol before the doors opened? Because that was another question that they wouldn't answer. And that's one that would be really critical. Because if they were already there, that means that most likely, what I would guess, is that they knew the layout of the House well enough to kind of be at the heads of the crowd, leading people to the places that would look the worst, like Speaker Pelosi's room, or office, the House chambers where they would take the votes, all the places that if you were just to stroll around the Capitol by yourself with no guide, you'd be lost in a heartbeat. But if you had somebody that knew the way around, that was sort of guiding people, and unbeknownst to the people they were guiding, wasn't actually part of the rally, was somebody that was there to help them get there because optically it looked terrible. Even though so many people said thank you to the Capitol Police, people said I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just here to protest. And a lot of people, just out of curiosity, were wondering, why are people going in? What's happening here? None of them were given any mercy. None of them were treated any differently. They're all treated as if they were all equally a threat to the democracy and a threat to the nation. And it's just, I think that the bigger threat are the people that make those claims, along with all the news media that have been nonstop shouting about this bullshit. But none more so than Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, but especially with Liz Cheney. Because it's obvious when you see a neocon, hardcore conservative whose father was part of the Bush administration and in fact was the vice president, who a lot of people think was more in charge of the actual war situations and the war decisions than Bush was, because all he cared about was if the American people approved of his presidency. I think in a lot of ways he was hoping that he could kind of redeem their family by getting elected to the second term, and then after that, I think he kind of, because his ratings were not that great, as that's why we got Obama. But I think in a lot of ways that like he kind of just didn't really care anymore. He just was like, okay, I got a second term. My dad didn't. I did. I could redeem our name and make us a proud family that has served the country with father and son for a combined total of 3 terms. That's great. And in actuality, they started one of the most terrible, as far as a global scale wise, how we were viewed. That was kind of a pivotal point, because there was never really that open idea of America attempting to kind of police the planet like we've been seen as now, until the Bush administration, which really was when it really kicked into high gear. As a matter of fact, that's when the movie Team America World Police came out, was during that administration. So, but anyway, but with Liz Cheney in particular, there's something nefarious going on, because, well, she seemed to always be taking a lot of pleasure in what she was doing, but she always seemed to have these sorts of bombshell revelations that were coming to the fore that nobody was talking about before she was. And as much as the Democrats definitely, did their fair share of taking swipes at Donald Trump and not controlling the crowd and calling for insurrection and calling for people, Liz Cheney in particular had some very very disturbing things that came to light under her questioning, and one in particular I will go over today. But before we do that, I just want to I'm going to get started with some video clips that we were going to play yesterday, and there's kind of to set the stage for like what exactly is going on right now and what exactly has been said. Well, this is predominantly, unfortunately also, but predominantly, this is a clip of a bunch of left-wing media organizations that are all talking about what Donald Trump is saying about Liz Cheney and wanting to investigate and bring charges against anyone who participated in the January 6th made-for-TV drama series, because it was nothing more than that. But there's also some good points that are brought up. But this is just, when you think about all the things I just said about, how the left behaves when it's a president that they don't like, and then how this all played out, it's absolutely wild, and it should be something that people always keep in mind when you superimpose on top of each other. Well, what do Democrats do and what do Republicans do? They both do, quite a bit to try and, essentially try to make a case that maybe there may have been foul play or wrongdoing, especially the way that our elections are going right now. That really is something, and I hope it's something that happens during this administration, because election integrity, the idea that, first of all, and this happened during the Trump administration, because, or was it then? Yeah, I think it was then. The Democrats made this huge case about how in the census we shouldn't ask if they're legally in the country, which is the dumbest thing you would, one of the most important things you should include on a census. Like the actual citizens, the actual American citizens, not just people just squatting in your state, but the actual citizens living in your state. Who are they? Not illegals, citizens, because that's what decides electoral votes. That's what decides the amount of House of Representatives, the number you get based on the counties and the size of the counties and how many there are per state. And if there's some demographic changes, there's your number of electoral votes, and the senators that you vote for are going to be the lines for counties are going to be redrawn, and people that are all in one county that might be majority all illegal might be voting entirely on one candidate. And then you have a member of Congress who is being voted predominantly by people who are illegally in the country. That's why you need to have the census be accurate about who it is, where they live, and if they're a legal resident. It's not something you have to say that, you don't have to say that this will be something will be tracked back to you if you answer this question. This will not be evidence of anything of you, whether you are as an individual legally or illegally in the country, because you could say something like that, because I think it's just something that's too important to or just not make them available at all to people unless you can verify that these people are here in the country legal. I don't know, there's got to be something done about that. But anyway, so this is why this bugs me. This is how the mainstream media on the left predominantly has been reacting to what Trump has been saying about the J6 committee, and particular against about what he hopes will happen when Kash Patel is FBI director, and when he has his Department of Justice all in order and everything is set up for his administration. Which, by the way, if you didn't catch the news yesterday, Mike Johnson, and I actually falsely reported this. It was 2 rounds, not 1, but still 2 rounds, 1 day. He won, and as I predicted, it was all Republicans voting for him, and it was all Democrats voting against him. And it's like one of those things where, there you go, told you. You think they give a shit about the country being united or any, like, I heard one of them say in a hearing, they're talking about, I guess the Republicans don't believe in bipartisanship anymore. Really? That's the Republicans now, is it? Because, I mean, I've seen them extend olive branches all the freaking time to you guys. And you guys just swat them away. You just might as well spit on them. Because you don't want an olive branch. You want to take the branch and smack them in the face with it and tell them what a racist they are. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be prefacing this clip as long as I am. But let's get to this clip real quick. Here we go. I reorganized things, and well, it's all appearing really small, unfortunately, so I got to make it bigger. Oh, no, wrong folder. Here we go. Okay. Okay, here we go. And by the way, there's also Betty Thompson, the chairman of the January 6th television series. He's also somebody featured in this video. He's just as big a snake and a real scumbag who has not let go of this precious narrative that he's been holding on to about the Trump administration and their evil January 6th riot. But yeah, so anyway, let's get on with this. This is some examples of the behavior of the leftist media, which, by the way, this is the committee. Normally you would see about like this would be the Democrats, and then you'd see this would be Republicans. But you see 2, and then there's Jamie Raskin, that piece of garbage. I don't know who the hell this is. I don't care really, but yeah, that's not how committees are usually run. So anyway, let's get on with this. Oh, let me make sure. Yeah, we got volume. This is up really loud. I don't know why, so let me turn it down a little bit. And okay, and here we go.
Biden will award the Presidential Citizens Medal to 20 people, including leading members of the January 6th congressional panel leaders. Mississippi Congressman Benny Thompson and former Congresswoman Liz Cheney of Montana will receive the second highest civilian award for leading the probe into the 2021 insurrection. As the
There they
same
go
event
again.
last year, at the same event last year, the president honored people who were involved in defending the Capitol from the rioter.
Donald Trump, just weeks away from being invested with the immense powers of the presidency, calling for a criminal investigation into Liz Cheney over witness tampering after a report from House Republicans singled her out, accusing her of colluding with a witness on the January 6th committee and recommending she be investigated for possible criminal prosecution.
And rightly
The president-elect weighing in on Tuesday's report just 3 hours ago, saying this on his Truth social platform, quote, Liz Cheney could be in a lot of trouble based on the evidence obtained by the subcommittee, which states that numerous federal laws were likely broken by Liz Cheney, and these violations should be investigated by the FBI.
They
End quote.
absolutely should.
3:11 a.m. this morning. The president-elect there, referring to the report released yesterday by a Republican-controlled House subcommittee,
Yeah, let's make sure we
alleging what
get that
it
in.
called, quote, the failures and politicization of the January 6th Select Committee, end quote. The report calls the committee, quote, a political weapon with a singular focus to deceive the public into blaming President Trump for the violence on January 6th and tarnish the legacy of his first presidency.
Sounds pretty accurate to me, yeah.
Among the report's allegations against Cheney, that she colluded with one of the committee's witnesses, Cassidy Hutchinson, who served as an
Remember
assistant
that.
to White House
Remember
Chief
that.
of Staff Mark Meadows. Hutchinson provided testimony about Trump's actions on
Yeah.
January 6th,
Bullshit testimony.
including recounting a story she was told about an interaction the president had with his Secret Service driver.
Real quick, first of all, you notice how she says, testified to information she heard. So it's hearsay. So you're admitting hearsay evidence into a committee about this. I mean, like, first of all, right off the bat, that should set some red flags up for anybody who's judicially minded. But secondly, like, when you hear this story, if you know about the vehicle that she's talking about, the Beast, it's the vehicle that generally transports the president around the Capitol, around the Washington D.C. It's like a big SUV, and it has big sections that block off access to the president and for the ability for anyone to reach the president or anything like that, and likewise for the president to reach anybody else. So the idea that any of this is true, with that in mind, keep that in mind when you hear this story, and then tell me if you hear any holes in this story, or lack of holes in this story. If you you'll get what I mean when you hear this, I'm sure.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel.
There's first point.
Mr. Engel grabbed his arm,
There's the second
said,
point.
"Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel.
There's the third point.
In a lengthy statement, Cheney
So-
refuted the report's
Riddle me this, everybody. How is it that Trump was able to, get through the space-time barrier there of, there's matter in the way. There's actually pretty thick and very, very hardened matter in the way. I think it's bulletproof. I think it's glass, but I think it's bulletproof and it's very thick. So tell me, how exactly would one go about that if they were, reaching across an area that's blocked by this matter that would interfere with someone's ability to reach and grab someone by the throat, say, or reach for a steering wheel or something, or have somebody else reaching up to grab his hand to prevent him from doing that. The whole thing's horseshit. And once again, this coming as secondhand testimony, which, by the way, they, of course, didn't want to hear from the first party sources, who all said, no, I didn't say that. That didn't happen. In fact, if I remember correctly, they barely even knew this freaking broad. But anyway, let's get back to this impeccable reporting.
Findings. She says that it, quote, intentionally disregards the truth and the Select Committee's tremendous weight of evidence and instead fabricates lies and defamatory allegations in an attempt to cover up what Donald Trump did. But now, of course, 4 years later, the Republican Party once again united behind Trump, and in little over a month, he will once again control the federal government, have the authority to order the investigations, or at least have the people that he installs in Department of Justice positions undertake investigations that he has openly called for months.
That.
I think those people committed a major crime.
Sir.
And Cheney was behind it. For what they did, honestly, they should go to jail.
One more item. After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us, and this committee has supplied that information to the Department of Justice. Let me say one more time, we will take any effort to influence witness testimony very seriously. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Hello. Allegation she made at the close of this week's hearing that witnesses coming before the committee have been threatened by people close to Trump.
Do you know who was doing it?
I don't want to comment on that. But it's very serious. It really goes to the heart of our legal system. And it's something the committee will certainly be reviewing.
So you think some of the testimony you received wasn't truthful because people were threatened?
The way that I would put it is that it gives us a real insight into how people around the former president are operating, into the extent to which they believe that they can affect the testimony of witnesses before the committee. And it's something we take very seriously. And it's something that people should be aware of. It's a very serious issue. And I would imagine the Department of Justice would be very interested in and would take that very seriously as well.
Now, bear in mind one thing real quick. I just want to make this clear because this has been blurred as far as what people understand, and why people would be confused makes sense because of what these people did. They did this in a way that is intentionally deceptive, but keep this part in mind. The Congress doesn't have any authority for to bring charges or to call for an arrest or to anything like that. They are a legislative body. They are there to write the laws and to write policy. They have no enforcement arm. That's what the presidency is predominantly for. The president is the executive branch, the president and the executive branch. Essentially, the president is the executive branch, but for the sake of the Constitution, the executive decides how to enforce the laws written by Congress, how best to execute the laws written by Congress, and then if there is a dispute on the laws, that's when the third branch of government kicks in, the judicial branch, and you bring it ultimately, if you need to, the Supreme Court, where the biggest disputes over constitutional matters are supposed to happen. However, this committee acted so much like a sort of trial jury, or a trial, what would it be, like a state trial or a federal trial, as opposed to a committee by the Congress, that it was very clear that they were trying to behave as if they were bringing charges themselves, or they had the ability to bring charges themselves, or to present this false picture to the American people that there should be action taken, and it's only because of that evil MAGA Republican side of the party that is preventing this from happening. No, that wouldn't happen at all. And look what has happened. Well, the executive branch during this administration has been pretty active in terms of going after those people that were even hinted at being involved in January 6th. In fact, they've gone and interviewed people they got a name mixed up and didn't know anything else other than, like, there's information. This person may have been at the Capitol on January 6th, and they go to interview somebody, and people have talked about this before. It's like, I wasn't even in Washington, D.C. during the January 6th thing. I wasn't there. I had never been in Washington, D.C. any time around that time. I hadn't been there in maybe ever. There's different stories, but different people had been approached by FBI officials asking them all these questions like, I wasn't there. I didn't have anything to do with it. And so that's how deep these people have been going. They've been trying to make sure. This phrase has been coming up a lot lately, and I can't remember who it was. I think it was Jefferson. Was it Jefferson or Madison? I can't remember. One of the founding fathers had mentioned our legal system being set up so that it was to reflect that it was better that 5 guilty people were to get away than 1 innocent person be convicted. And that might seem overly kind, but it's like when you think about what our country stands for and the freedoms that we have and the amount of freedoms that are taken away when you convict somebody to a long sentence, that's a very hefty punishment in this country. And so rightly so, the people that should be stripped of any rights need to be people that are, as our system says, beyond a shadow of a doubt, guilty, beyond a reasonable doubt, guilty of the crime they're being, what's it called? The crime they're being investigated for. Not according to this crowd. This is why when it gets compared to a police state and gets compared to a authoritarian government, it's like they're not far off the mark. But anyway, this is almost done. We'll get finished with this.
In fact, Cheney told me that the committee may make a criminal referral to the Justice Department recommending that anybody that attempted to influence witness testimony before the committee be prosecuted for witness tampering. Robin?
Yeah, do you think there should be a criminal investigation into Liz Cheney, one of your former colleagues?
Tim Burchett.
If she broke the law, why should she be exempt? If I guarantee you, if Manu Raju or you broke the law, they'd drag y'all into court in chains. And why should she be exempt?
You don't think Liz Cheney broke the law, do you?
If she manipulated this thing, if she met with people, if she coached them, as they're saying, if she talked to them on a secret website, which they're saying she did, if she coached them, if she altered evidence, if she withheld evidence, then she broke the law.
What's the evidence? What's the evidence of that? I mean, the report came out just days after Donald Trump said that Liz Cheney and other members of the committee should go to jail. Aren't they just doing his bidding?
What's the evidence that Matt Gaetz has other than a report? You've got a report. It's the same thing. That's why people do not trust the media. You have a double standard for one and not for the other. If she didn't break the law, then she's fine. But if she did break the law, she should be held accountable. What is wrong with them asking questions?
The House Ethics Committee. The House Ethics Committee is voting to release this report, presumably.
If she broke the law,
isn't
then
this
she should
Banana
be
Republic stuff?
Why is she being exempted from the law? Everybody who broke the law should be exempted. No, it's not Banana Republic. If she broke the law, I don't see why that's such a hard thing. If she didn't break the law,
there's no evidence she broke the law.
Fine.
There's no evidence she broke the law. They just looked at what happened on January 6th and Donald Trump's attempt to overturn a free and fair election.
Other than Barry Loudermilk, who's a very respected member of Congress, doing his very long investigation and very tiring investigation into this. And if they found it, I think it ought to be brought to light. If not, then she's fine. I don't have a problem with them investigating that.
You want the government to go after Trump's political enemies?
If they broke the law, I don't care if they're my political enemies or they're my friends. If they broke the law, dadgummit, they ought to be brought in and they ought to be brought to justice.
You notice the obvious double standard there, like allegations. I've been hearing that a lot lately when it comes to Trump, especially. Like there are allegations that he or Matt Gaetz even there are allegations of this and that. When it's allegations about a Republican they don't like, and it's like, oh, these allegations are pretty damning. they're just allegations, of course. You know, there's no proof that any of this happened. But these allegations, they're bad. But when there's allegations against a Democrat, oh, there's no proof that any of this. Yeah, there's allegations, though. We should investigate the allegations, don't you think? Well, there's no proof. That's why you look at the allegations, dipshit. Like, what? It is so sick how these people are so quick to rush to the defense of people that are, like, they don't give a shit. And yet they're already ready with this stupid bullshit like, there's no proof of that. Yeah, because there was no investigation yet. And you guys continually trying to say there's no proof, there should be no investigation. How is there going to be proof without an investigation? If there are allegations, especially credible ones coming from someone that, I don't know, maybe was in, closed door sessions with someone, and there's a reason I'm saying this, in closed door sessions with people like a witness and I don't know, Liz Cheney or something, and things were said during that meeting that seemed really unusual, that might lend a little bit of credibility to that person, don't you think? Don't you think that might be something that would be worthy of that investigation to see if there's any credibility to the allegations that are being raised? Because I'm sick to death of hearing of Matt Gaetz and the damning allegations he has against him, and basically he's not even a member of Congress anymore, but because he was nominated as a potential what's it called, Attorney General for the Department of Justice before he withdrew, and now Pam Bondi is the new nominee. But if he hadn't been the nominee at one point, I guarantee you they wouldn't have released the report that they did with a ton of allegations, and they wouldn't still be talking about the pretty damning allegations against Matt Gaetz and how these look like pretty bad allegations. Yeah, but they're allegations. God. It's like one word is so important on one side, but to the other, they just don't even give a shit. And that's why it bugs me more than anything when they play these games. And it's like, because they know how that, make no mistake, they know exactly what they're doing. They're doing this very, very specifically to make sure that people, regardless of the words they're using, people in their minds are recognizing the weight that's being given to one, and to the other, it's being just acted like, well, I mean, but there's no proof. There's no proof. It's just like with Joe Biden and the influence peddling, which, by the way, once again, just to go over something as an example, they said this over and over again. There's no proof that Joe Biden benefited from the foreign business deals of Hunter Biden and James Biden. Okay. There's a problem already, though. If you admit that Hunter Biden himself benefited from the overseas business deals and the peddling of influence to multiple nations around the world, you already are stepping in a territory where you're admitting that, yeah, that was he should be found guilty, because they I don't know why they ignored this, and I don't know why this isn't. Well, I do, because Merrick Garland is at the head of the DOJ, and he wouldn't bring charges, and when he had his special prosecutor go in, the conclusion was that he was an elderly, well-meaning old man with a bad memory. So there was nothing about his guilt or lack of guilt. There was only the assertion that now this does have some relevance, because when you bring charges, especially very large charges that are going to be, nationally recognized as a really big case, you have to, number one, establish that there are charges and evidence that's significant to where you believe that a jury would be reasonably likely to find that defendant guilty. And number two, and this is the key, that guilty verdict would be upheld on appeal. Now, in the main trial, you could bet that there'd be a lot of focus by some top-notch prosecutors that would be all there bringing, their best evidence forward and using every single piece of evidence they possibly could to let everybody know exactly what happened during these sort of influence peddling operations that Hunter and Joe and Jim Biden all participated in. But if at the trial or on appeal, and more likely on appeal, if they were able to somehow say that, in Biden's diminished condition and his poor cognitive state, he's not remembering events well enough to properly and effectively defend himself, and even the attorney, while doing his best, wasn't able to very effectively defend Mr. Former President Joe Biden because he wasn't able to ever truly be able to communicate their effective defensive strategy with him. Is that, there's all kinds of angles they could go from, but ultimately it would be a way to get a jury, which once again, juries do tend to be sympathetic to things like this when someone appearing before them has a mental condition that is it's obvious and impairing to the degree that it's kind of sad to watch. And in the case of Biden, it could be very easily, said that because of his diminished mental faculties, he's not capable of being able to properly defend himself, even with counsel. One thing I can't stand about that argument, though, is that the guy's still supposedly the president of the United States, so his mental capacity is fine to run this giant nation, but not to stand in defense for a case that presents the allegations of him. But anyway, the point that I was getting at was that they don't understand that the corruption charges and what's it called, basically influence peddling charges. If you're found guilty, you could be found guilty of influence peddling, of federal corruption, and of anything like that, bribery. If you yourself aren't the person that receives the monetary gain. And that's the key point that they never want to talk about. So, it's pretty obvious that Biden has received some kind of monetary gain, obviously, because all the evidence in the messages, the infamous 10% for the big guy, obviously. But there's way more than that. Even Hunter saying, give 50% of my income to Pops, where his income at that time was largely from Burisma, if I remember correctly. But the point is that, even if that wasn't going on, even if all the money was going to Hunter or Jim Biden or whatever, here's the problem. The laws are written with the expectation that, maybe you have an elected official who is doing this to, to enrich their family only, because they are making their own. When you're in government, there's these days there's plenty of opportunities to make money off of all kinds of different schemes. So the laws are written in a way that's like, even if all of the financial gain is going to a family member or a friend or somebody, a random stranger on the street, they don't have to benefit monetarily or in any real way that's tangible. They don't have to be the one benefiting in order for the corruption charge to stick. The event still took place. The intent was still to peddle influence to a foreign state, and if the whole act was reciprocated, then there's no way that you can argue that even though he didn't benefit monetarily, which we're pretty damn sure he did, but even if he didn't, he's still guilty. So your argument is pointless. He doesn't have to benefit. He didn't have to have any benefit from this. That doesn't matter. He's still influence peddling and therefore still guilty of the charge, period. And so I hate how they use that shit as an excuse. But anyway, just goes to show once again how absolutely to the core this government has been rotted from the inside out to be just this massive blob of corruption and nothing in the slightest that reflects anything that you find in our founding documents or you find in our values as American people in terms of the Constitution or anything like that. Nothing. There's nothing at all that's reflected there. This government has become so bloated and out of control that it really is like it's going to take a long time. I'm really, this is like the thing with Trump's presidency is this isn't necessarily going to be a presidency that's meant to right all the wrongs. This is meant to be a pivotal changing of the tide where we have finally a set of principles and guidelines and direction that gets us away from all this destructive garbage that's been going on and been allowed to get way, way out of control to the point that the idea of representing your constituents is, to many members of Congress, not even, not even a thought they have during the day. That's not even something they even think about at all. And so it's despicable. I mean, I tell you, Liz Cheney, I don't know if she ever thought one time about her constituents because she's too busy thinking about Trump and how to put him in prison. But so anyway, that's the whole story. Now, I told you a few things to be aware of. I told you a few things that were problems with the story. But this is where I'm going to get interesting, and I hope that this is where people will really enjoy this because for everything that they're saying right now, nobody's talking about this. Nobody's talking about this. And this, like I said, was 2 months ago. It's on Tucker Carlson. He's talking to the first legal counsel of Cassidy Hutchinson. And what exactly happened? And this is one hell of a story. I won't say much other until after we go through it. But I'll just say this. In case you were wondering, like, well, what could have gone on? Let me tell you, this is about as bad as it could be. Like, if you would imagine how bad it would be for someone who is going in and what kind of intentions they had to go and testify in front of this committee and what their worst intentions could be and what their worst kinds of basically what would compel them to do what they're doing after being someone who was a low-level staff member in the White House and an assistant to Mark Meadows, I think he was the staff director, staff something. Anyway, she was just a low-level staffer, not anybody with a lot of influence, but that's why I cut off at the very beginning of this clip that the committee was looking for mostly young people who didn't have a lot of experience in government first for the January 6th committee because they wanted people that weren't particularly super deep involved in the political world of D.C. and also people that might be a little bit more intimidated or at the very least idealistic about the positions of like senior FBI agents or chairmen or majority leaders, minority leaders of different chambers of the Senate or of the Congress, and so they were going after these people, and so there was a group of lawyers that were kind of getting together and saying, well, these people really need representation to make sure they know what's happening before, this gets out of hand and yada, yada. So at the very beginning of this clip, this guy is talking about, that's what he's essentially talking about is the the reason why he ended up getting this case and the mindset behind the people that all kind of got involved to do this. And so that's how he kind of became the attorney for Cassidy Hutchinson early on. Now, like I said, this is, you can already probably tell, this is some pretty important information to this whole case, and it really is definitely relevant to the situation. Why is it that no one has brought this up? I can't understand why it hasn't been brought up, at least on the conservative side of things, unless they just haven't watched it or are unaware of it, or for some reason don't believe this guy. But it sounds like at least he's reached out to Congress at this point and he's talked about this, and hopefully there's some time that is permitted to him in the next Congress, in particular, when they're investigating anything surrounding January 6th operation to, just further divide the country. But until then, I think people should be aware and get a little bit more information on this before that happens, because it's going to be very important to know these sorts of details going into that situation. So I'm going to go ahead and play that now, because this is the important part of the video. So, and yeah, I knew this was going to be a long episode when I did it yesterday, and we're just about the same amount of time today, only this time I'm actually able to do this much more cohesively. So let's bring this up. This is, what's it called? Once again, I had another clip that I thought maybe, here it is. I thought maybe I would play today, but I don't think I'm going to get to it. And this is big enough anyway, so, whoops. This guy's name is Stefan Passantino. That sounds kind of familiar. And the only time I know him coming out and speaking is on Tucker Carlson's show. So this isn't something that's been appearing everywhere. So, that's that. That's something funny too, that ever since Tucker left Fox, I think, it's pretty much unquestionable that the best work he's ever put out has come out on his new network. But it is kind of funny that, because of the sort of rules and stipulations and policies and things you can do when you still work for the company and you're a former employee of the company, you can't, just have a news segment where you bring him on to talk to him, or, whatever. It won't work that way. But, and that's why, he does end up talking to other reporters on other networks, but not on Fox. And so, so there's not, and because that's such a, major network in the country, that's where a lot of people would see this, but that can't happen there. But still, there's so many people that know about, for God's sakes, Tucker's getting some reputation and audiences now that are rivaling Joe Rogan in terms of popularity and viewership. And it is interesting too, because he does have a very similar approach, although it's with a totally different mindset. Like, he wants to interview interesting people just like Joe Rogan does and have them on the show. The difference is in Tucker's discussions, it's usually about government policy or certain, not even just United States current events, but worldwide current events that are important, especially to the United States. Like, he went to Russia again to interview one of their officials recently, and so after Putin, he went back to interview him, and it was a very insightful interview again. And so there's just no boundaries for him anymore to be able to do whatever he wants to do. And that's why I think he can really unload. But even though it's exploded, you really kind of have to be involved in at least sort of the moderate sort of tech world to be able to know, okay, this is Rumble, this is where Tucker is, this is where you can find his work. And so even to some people that aren't as tech savvy but only really watch YouTube for stuff, they would find maybe a little bit of this, but they wouldn't find the full uncut video. So now this interview is like over an hour and a half long. So, but I think now I didn't go into everything. There's a lot of important stuff, and I would suggest to watch the whole interview on Tucker's channel. You can just look up Tucker Carlson on Rumble. You'll find his channel easily. But I picked out about 13 to 14 minutes worth of probably some of the most important parts of the areas that are in direct response to what we just were talking about. So that's what this video is. We'll go ahead and get started on that, and then we'll probably end up closing the show out for the week. But yeah, we'll bring this up and then we'll get started. Okay. All right. You know what? I just realized too. I think, yeah. Hold on. I'm sorry. I'm using a new. Yep, ambience. I'm using a new. It's like a equalizer that's digital for PC. It's just it's not like anything really super special, but I just wanted to have some kind of control over the EQ. But it does have a. It's almost like a concert hall effect where there's a sort of a ambience that echoes a little bit, echo effect slightly. It works good for music. It doesn't work at all very well for direct speech. So I'm gonna just make sure that's off, and then we'll get to this. But in fact, I'll just change the setting altogether to voice, if I remember correctly. Yeah, there we go. Okay, all right. So. Like I said, this guy's name is Stefan Pasantino. So here we go. I got to close this and bring this full screen, and there we go. All right. Oops. Okay, so let's get this going.
And so there was a process for some of the younger lawyers to say, well, let's try to find lawyers for these people who will just help them navigate this investigation getting brought before the January.
Are these people who smashed windows in the Capitol or assaulted cops with flagpoles?
No, absolutely. These are the people who happen to have been working in the Trump campaign in 2020 or had been working in the White House in 2020 or in some way had something to offer with respect to the dynamic of
some of them not at January 6th, the protest?
Oh, yeah. Nobody who I was representing was at a protest. Everyone who I was representing were people who had either worked in the White House or had worked for the Trump campaign.
So they had nothing to do with the January 6th demonstration?
No.
The
idea
I just want to be clear on that.
Was to create a narrative of what was happening inside the White House, what was happening inside the campaign from the election in 2020 through January 6th and afterwards, and to try to create a political narrative of what was happening. And sort of one of the 101 investigative rules is always start with the junior, youngest, most people, intimidate them, get them to say things that you can then use to create a political narrative or whatever the narrative was. And I'd represented a few of those fairly significant folks, but mostly I was being asked to help these very, very young people who were just getting hailed before this committee to try to give testimony. And it was
And they're using the FBI for this, just to be clear.
Oh, yes. No question. They would hand subpoenas, and I had one very young, she was working in the campaign office, couldn't have been more than 23, 24 years old, who told me the story. Not only did the FBI show up unannounced at her door, but when she answered the door, the FBI said, well, while we're here, you mind if we just ask you some questions about what you were doing, what was President Trump doing, what was the campaign doing with respect to messaging about January 6th, which To me, as a lawyer, correct. There was
Was this girl at January 6th?
This girl was a campaign worker. So she was helping to put out, doing junior research of what was now colloquially called the Stop the Steal effort, that they were going after these younger folks trying to find out what it was that they were talking about. And to me, as a lawyer, in order for the system to work, full transparency also requires that people's rights be protected. And that includes the right that you have somebody there who's protecting your interests. If you are a junior person who might have something to offer with respect to what happened in January 6th, query to me whether the January 6th even served a legislative function at all.
That's one. I'll just real quick. That's another reason why they do these surprise sorts of out of nowhere events where they just pop up at someone's door, whether it's to knock it in and arrest them or whether it's to get them to talk about something that they otherwise maybe wouldn't, because the element of surprise on their side is definitely something where, somebody that is, even that doesn't have anything to hide, is going to kind of be trying to desperately prove that they don't have anything to hide, and so is going to accept, whereas otherwise they might be a little bit more, be able to think it through a little bit more, like, wait a minute, I just told you I didn't have anything to do with it, so why do you need to ask me any questions? It wouldn't make any sense, but because they're either intimidated or hyper defensive or whatever it might be, it increases that probability when you just pop up at someone's doorstep and you got that kind of authority like the FBI does. That's immediately gonna inspire, and they know that. They know how strong the reaction they would get to showing up at someone's door and somebody really desperately wanted to show, hey, I got nothing to do with this. I don't have anything to do with the accusations or anything like that. I just did this or that or whatever. And that is excuse me. That is obviously something they will be more than willing to take full advantage of, and they definitely were in this. So anyway, sorry, I just wanted to interject that because it's kind of important. So.
But stipulating that it was there for some legislative purpose, people who are providing information under subpoena and under oath and under penalty of being found liable for false statements should have somebody there to protect their interests.
So you make a point that people might not be aware of. So the Congress is the legislative branch of government. And so the purpose of committee hearings in the Congress is to craft legislation.
Correct.
Right, there's no other purpose.
Correct.
Committees in the Congress do not exist to use the FBI to hound their political opponents into prison, correct?
Correct. And not only that, but the framers of the Constitution made it very, very clear there are to be three branches of government. There is a legislative branch that is only supposed to be making the laws. It's up to the executive branch to execute those laws, and then the judiciary to actually enforce those laws. That's a very clear standard. And when you have a legislative body, and this is what happened to me, and I'm sure we're going to get into it, that decides that they are going to drift beyond their legislative function, their fact-finding function in support of passing legislation, and they're going to move into a law enforcement method. We don't like this person. This person presents a narrative to us that we don't like. We are going to use the full weight and power of the United States government to try and execute that person without any due process of law. That is completely unconstitutional. And that is ultimately where I found myself at the end of this road.
So that's a police state function.
As my client goes in, and it was my job to protect her. My job, she was somebody who had presented to me as saying, I don't want to testify. I don't like the January 6th committee. I don't want to do any of this. How do I get through this process and be able to have a job on the back end? That was the mission as it was presented to me. I will testify if I have to, but I want to be able to get through it. But these leaks kept happening. And I kept assuming that it was the January 6th committee. So after this third interview, the one that I'm describing to you, which was, there was only 4 of us in the room. Literally, as Cassidy and I are in the cab driving out together, I have on my phone a text message that had clearly come while we were testifying, asking me about her testimony. And I was livid about that in fact, in real time, somebody's leaking to the press. So I took a screenshot of that And I sent it to Dan George, the staffer, and I was really upset. I sent him a text, and I still have all these texts. And I said, well, that was really fast. You guys did that. And I had a subsequent conversation where I said, why are you destroying this poor girl's life by every time she testifies, you are leaking about it. And now you're leaking about this third interview. You're destroying any career opportunity she might have had. And what Dan George told me, he says, I assure you, this was not us who leaked. Nobody on the committee knew we were doing this interview.
Oh, wait, no,
it was only Liz Cheney
Yeah.
and I. And that
Oh,
Dan
that's
George
right,
said to
that's
me,
right, that's right, that's
and in
right.
fact, the other committee members would probably be upset if they knew that Liz Cheney had done that.
Yeah, I think it
and
is.
he told me all of that
it
in the
is,
context of trying to assure
Liz
me
Cheney's counsel.
that they weren't the ones who had leaked in real time the fact that we had gone in. But it was extraordinarily unusual to me that there
So
was
who did it?
Who did the leaking?
Yeah.
Well, I can speculate, as they say in the horror movies, the call might have come from inside the house.
Yeah.
It might have been my client who is, and in fact, one of the things that
you think it was
Cheney.
Cassidy
Well,
Hutchinson did that?
I have no way of knowing, of course. But what I do know is that in real time, when all of the allegations against me broke, I was reached out to by former friends of Cassidy Hutchinson saying, I can't believe what they're doing to you. I have text messages in real time between me, the friend, and Cassidy, in which Cassidy is saying the diametrically opposite. Stefan wants me to cooperate with the committee. I don't want to cooperate with the committee. And also saying, Stefan assures me that the committee's not going to leak, but I don't trust that. And this is Cassidy Hutchinson texting to her friend, I'm going to run my own parallel operation. And she identifies, I'm going to have a line of communication with the New York Times and Politico. And she's already talking at the very outset of our representation that she doesn't trust that this will stay quiet and that she wanted to run her own investigation. I filed a defamation lawsuit against Weissman, a MSNBC person. I included all of these text
Andrew
messages.
Weissman,
Yes.
the federal prosecutor.
Yes. Who, as you can imagine, when all these stories came out, I had just unending scorn. But one of the things that Cassidy Hutchinson had testified to in her deposition when she was talking about me, among all of the negative and bad things that she said about me, some of which I think were just not true, but largely a lot of which, and it sounds a little weird coming from me, can be explained as a somewhat impressionable person coming in thinking she's going into an adversarial relationship. But one of the things that came out of that was Cassidy was very, very clear. Stefan never told me to lie, never told me to lie. And that when Andrew Weissman and others literally tweeted, well, her new lawyers are the good lawyers, unlike the lawyer that told her to lie. Well, I just had enough at that point. It's like, I'm just not going to be a victim anymore. We have defamation laws for a purpose. I'm going to avail myself of them. And in that complaint, the text messages that I've just described to you, I've screenshotted, and they're in the complaint. But it was somewhat clear to me from text messages that I've seen that there appears to have been from the very outset a messaging operation that was being run by my own client, completely unbeknownst to me. Now, I'm basing that on just text messages that I've seen and basing it on the fact that Liz Cheney's staffers assured me nobody else knew that this was happening and they would never leak it because they wouldn't have wanted their own committee to know. And it's ironic. I'm a little almost embarrassed about it now, but in the context of that conversation that I had with Dan George, I had this... I was still at that point sort of a naive institutionalist Washington lawyer. I had grown up in Washington my whole life. I'd been around that. I had incredible respect for the institutions of Washington, for Congress, for the media, for when Walter Cronkite said something.
I was going to wait till you finish, but I just want to say this real quick because it's important to remember this too, that this is before it came out that the people investigating the committee that were coming in from the Trump administration had been discovering that all of the records from the January 6th committee have been destroyed. The only thing that's left is the report, which is just a big pile of bullshit. But all of the investigative files, all of the records, all the reports, all the testimony, everything is destroyed. Everything. That is something that is not done. That's something that's not supposed to be done. It's all supposed to go into a record, and you're supposed to be able to look through it whenever, just the endless piles of, records from hearings that likely will never be opened ever again from Congress is massive. But in a situation like this, you got to imagine it's obvious that somebody may want to look at them, which is exactly why they would get rid of them. And this goes back to Hillary Clinton and to the Benghazi thing and her servers and her phones and her laptops, her tablets. All the SIM cards were destroyed. All the actual hard drives were smashed. They destroyed every piece of evidence, literally, they could. And, is to make sure that, there's like 30 or 40 messages that were found that the committee was able to get a hold of. They were saying towards the end there were thousands that were likely on those devices and drives that were destroyed. So that you would never know the full extent. And the same thing goes with this here, that who knows what kind of information, who knows who kept, who was recording this information. But obviously they didn't want that getting out to the Trump administration, but they never would have guessed in a million years at that point that there's no way Trump's getting elected again. That's why this whole thing, that's why they're more mad than anything else. That's why this whole election was their worst nightmare and why they're still going crazy about this, because they didn't ever suspect at all. They would have guessed at that time, and I would guess probably most of America would have too. Even I thought at the time that, I hope that he is able to clear his name. I hope that he's able to, help, either the next candidate or help the next Republican Party as a whole by giving consultation and let people understand what they're in for. And I never would have even guessed myself at the time that he would be not only the nominee, but he would be so damn completely just like himself, but refined into this new, absolutely perfected version of everything that everybody was hoping for the first time around. And that's why, when they were seeing that this was going on, this was going to be a real possibility. It's like, oh God, oh no, okay. And I can guarantee you, somebody made a decision at that point, like, we got to get rid of all this stuff. We got to get rid of everything. And that's something that, once again, their cohorts in the media are never going to report on. Nobody's ever going to make mention of that kind of thing. I had to throw that in because, even like what he's saying here, and he might have thought of this, but I don't think he would have really given it any credence. And this was a couple months ago. This was before, I think, Trump even won the election, or maybe it was after. But either way, it wasn't long after. It was around the same time. So regardless, the point was that that this was just a discussion that was going on about the January 6th hearing and why there was nothing about that hearing was at all meant to do anything but discredit Donald Trump, discredit the MAGA movement, and to make them seem as bad as possible so that no one would support them anymore. And it just they didn't count on the fact that Joe Biden's administration would be so catastrophic and just destroy so much of the country. And even, once again, you had every single state in the country move to the right. Just about, every single state, except for, California had 10 districts that flipped red. Insane. But so obviously it didn't work. But they're still licking their wounds. If they had to answer for this shit, they would be done for, which would have been nice. But because I was thinking about this the other day when we were talking about Cenk Uygur and showing up. I would hope that there are some Democrats that would like to restore a Democratic Party that actually was what the Democratic Party is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a party that is adverse to the Republican Party in policy, but not in a way that treats them like they are a threat to the country, treats them as if they are not the right decision for the American people to make if they want to see the country progress in the direction that would be most beneficial to them. This has become something totally different than what their messaging does now. And quite frankly, people in the media like that dumb broad I was just showing earlier, or that stupid moron, he always looks angry. He always looks like he's about to freaking just jump out of his desk and start choking somebody because he looks like such a freaking stick up his ass asshole. But basically, like when you have that compliance with the media, plus you have this narrative you've been helping to foster about how the other side are all evil, terrible people, and they're going to. So it's funny as hell thinking about that too, because we just saw yet another attack and 2 attacks from people who likely were influenced by. It was ISIS, by the way. It wasn't Hamas. When I was trying to figure that out the other day, it was ISIS. That they went up there with a straight face in front of the country and said that the number one terror threat to the country right now, by far, is white nationalist radical white nationalist violence, or radical white supremacist terrorism. That was it. Radical white supremacists. That's the number one terror threat. Not ISIS, not Islamic terrorists, none of that. It's radical white supremacists. I don't know about you, but I don't remember hearing during my life of white supremacists going up and hijacking planes to destroy any towers in the country. The Oklahoma City bombing, I guess you could. The Oklahoma City bombing, I guess you could, stay with, but that was more out of militias than white supremacists. But still, even that, like, I would say that the dates that you could mark on a calendar where there was attack by a radical white supremacist, that's a terrible thing, of course. But if you're trying to figure out what the number one threat to the country is, and you have limited resources, you want to make sure that there's as little damage as possible. I don't think you want to send all your agents to be watching all the white people you think might be white supremacists. I think it'd be much more effective to see, like, for example, when Gays for Palestine was wandering around and wearing the headdress, or the what is it? Stupid. I don't give a fuck what it's called. Fuck those people. They're wearing all their Hamas cosplay shit and acting like they're part of the revolution. No, you're part of the class of morons who's not aware that if you were to show up in Gaza, you would be murdered on the spot. I mean, it's just like, but once again, you're worried about the white supremacists. Grow the fuck up. Jesus Christ. Anyway, I'm sorry. Well, let's get to this. This is pretty close to done now. So
it was a fact. Incredible respect for the agencies, the State Department, the intelligence. And so I was still somewhat in that world where I had this respect. And as I'm having this conversation with Dan George, the staffer, I'm saying, I cannot believe you guys were leaking literally while we're in there. And he was assuring me he hadn't. I had a conversation with Dan George. I said, Dan, you and I are going to work in this town far too long to be playing games with any leaking to the press. And I said, I assure you, I've practiced law for 30 years. This is not how I do business. And I have too much respect for the Congress. And I said, and I have too much respect for Liz Cheney to ever leak. And I asked him at the time, I said, I want you to please go and tell Liz Cheney how much respect I have for her and that I would never leak something that came out of the committee. Now, Dan George tells me he had that conversation with Cheney. I don't know if they actually did, but all of these are reasons why, to me, I was confronted with a highly, highly unusual scenario whereby there was this small operation that was done, this small interview, lots of security, but I didn't think anything of it. At the time, It was unusual, but it moved on. It was only later, after I had been fired as Cassidy's lawyer and after she had testified live on TV, that she subsequently provided lots of testimony describing in detail the nature of our interaction together. And it was in that September transcript that I learned all of these back channel things. I learned the degree to which there had been communications that had been going on, how they had set up this interview, how they had expected me to block her from testifying, how they had sort of laughed about how surprised I was that a lot of these new facts were coming out. And she literally testifies in that interview that as we're walking out of the Cannon office building, the two of us, we've completed this interview. I didn't obstruct her. The transcripts are there. I never blocked her from testifying. I never told her, I never created objections to coach her. I didn't do any of those things. But she literally describes in her testimony, as we're walking out the door, she turns around to Dan George, literally behind my back, saying something to the effect of mouthing, "I'm so screwed." And that Dan George mouths back to her, "I'm sorry." Now, when I'm reading this in the transcript, and it's all there for anyone who wants to read it, I realize this whole thing had been a setup. And if it was simply a question of, well, we just want to get the truth from Cassidy, well, then just fire me, get a new lawyer, let her testify. No, this was very important that I be sitting next to her while she provided this new inflammatory testimony with the eye towards having me obstruct her in some way.
Why were they so intent on hurting you? You're just a lawyer.
Well,
here's the rub.
I'm speculating on that, but one could infer that you need to have a reason why testimony changed. Why was it that somebody who provided testimony one way asked open-ended questions where the lawyer didn't obstruct, didn't block the person? In fact, in the first two interviews, the only objections I ever raised was when Dan George was asking really incoherent questions, and I would say, "Do you mean this?" And he would literally thank me. It's all on the record. You don't have to believe me. Those are the only times I interrupted. But now you have to say, well, now the person who was asked, "Hey, what happened on the ellipse?" and tells one story, now wants to tell a very diametrically different story about strangling the president, strangling Secret Service, or lots of things. There has to
Grabbing
be
the
a
wheel
reason.
of the limousine.
Right. These all came out as new evidence.
So, what is Liz Cheney? Why go after Liz Cheney? Fuck you. Are you fucking kidding me? Listen, just you could tell by that guy's demeanor and the way he speaks and his reverence for, the United States and its laws, that this is a guy that is a very honest guy, somewhat naive, but someone who's not going to ever, be persuaded to do anything, that's going to not be in the best interest of his client or anything like that. So for them to take this guy who, that must have seemed like, a perfect, sacrificial lamb for this situation, where they take this guy who never would have seen it coming and have, this girl who's going to be their new witness to this incredibly important event that happened that shows Trump's malice and his evil intent. And the reason she didn't bring it forward first is because this guy was manipulating her. And it's like, how sinister is it? They're the ones who are planting these ideas, planting these narratives that are things like, you'll be. Who knows what they dangled in front of her to get her to, go along with this, but ultimately it seems obvious to anybody that would analyze this breakdown that there's no other explanation other than they got her to feel like she was somebody extreme. She was the star witness essentially at the end of the whole committee, because she had told this super sensational story about these events that she supposedly heard. And once again, it's hearsay, but it's so sensational that, this is really going to be. And yet, when you listen to her attorney describe everything that happened to provide that testimony. That's just one aspect. That's just one witness and one aspect of this whole ridiculous fucking just stupid committee that they have planned. They've blocked any actual legitimate conservatives from being on it to ask any questions. They've hired a television director to basically be the one to direct the whole thing in terms of, like, you know, cameras, lighting, microphones, the direction, and, you know, to have the most impact and how to, quote unquote, in his own words, sell the story. So, you know, they're presenting it as a made for TV drama. They're not conducting a House hearing on the events of January 6th. They're presenting a television show on a dramatization of the events of January 6th in a sort of courtroom style movie that you would see in some shitty made-for-TV film. It is just, it's not only embarrassing, it is one of the biggest slights on our country and our branches, and our three co-equal branches of government in the entire nation's history. And for pieces of garbage on the liberal media to sit there and cover for this kind of shit, I'm sorry. Like, the idea that you wouldn't want to have somebody looking over what this committee actually did and what were the consequences of it. If you don't think that, you're not only a non-critical journalist, you're a non-critical human being, and you deserve to be nowhere near the job of a quote-unquote reporter, because you're not a reporter of anything. You're someone whose opinion of yourself and of your party is way too high, and I think you need to get the fuck off the air, to be honest. But, like, that's why nobody's talked about this. Nobody's shown these clips. And that's, like I said, the whole interview, and I really highly recommend checking it out. It's about 2 hours long, and it might even be over. Just slightly, like, it's like 2:06 or somewhere around there. It might be a little less, a little more. But this guy goes into more detail about everything that happened before and after and everything. But that was just like, that's the crux of the issue. And that's why, if you were going to single Liz Cheney out, if anybody would be questioning it, you know, show them that. Show them that and explain. So what exactly is it you think is bad about questioning this person? Because I think that, considering the fact that not only did all this happen, but, you know, afterwards, when she was defeated in her congressional, when she lost her congressional seat because her state voted her stupid ass out, where'd she appear next? Oh, that's right, next to, of all people, Kamala fucking Harris, to make sure that she did everything she could to supposedly help her, and really, in actuality, I think that's where a lot of people. I know that's where, you know, I was talking about Cenk and Anna at the Young Turks the other day. That was one thing that both of them mentioned as a very pivotal moment for them to recognize, wait a minute, why is the Democratic nominee for president out here with an endorsement and sitting side by side with Liz Cheney, the war hawk, and her father, who was accused by the left of committing war crimes while he was vice president? Why exactly is it that you're having this endorsement from her and acting like this is the greatest thing that has happened in this campaign? It just shows you who these people are. It's nothing but a power grab for them, and there's not one slight interest at all in bettering the lives of the American citizens. And that's why, you know, as I said with the speaker hearing, that's why Mike Johnson, I think, is the right decision. Most people on the conservative end of things, and I'm someone who definitely feels the same way, think that he's not exactly the most perfect speaker. He's done a lot of things that I don't agree with. One of the biggest for me is not even the most latest stuff, but it's right at the beginning, when the first thing he talked about was providing funding to Ukraine, which is like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? So I have my complaints with Mike Johnson. However, I think he's also somebody that at least listens, and he's somebody who does want to do right by his party, although he may be, I think the biggest problem with Mike Johnson is that he's still kind of in over his head in this position. And it was like a situation where I don't know if he was necessarily ready. He's adapted remarkably well. He's been able to cover up for a lot of the mistakes he's made, but I still am a little leery. I definitely don't think he's the best person for the job. But here's the thing. I know he's a safe bet, at least for now. And right now, there's only one thing that's critically important. We don't need any holdups. We don't need any controversies. And we don't need any, definitely more than anything else, we definitely don't need any infighting. That's the number one thing we need to prevent, because God knows we're going to get enough garbage from the left to hold this up. We don't need people on the right holding it up. We need to have Trump inaugurated, and we need to have the Senate go through the confirmation process of getting his nominees approved and sworn in and get them to work, because as Trump has promised on day one, there's going to be a lot of work to do. And I think it's going to be very telling, because I guarantee you, and like I said early on, Trump, this has been talked about a lot lately. I'll just close on this. Trump, at this stage in American history, I think that if he had won in 2020 and had been sworn in in 2021 and been serving his second term, and he was about to be out, I don't think he would have been nearly as effective as he is going to be now, nor do I think he would have been as prepared to deal with the same forces that were trying to prevent him from being successful in his first term. He wouldn't have known how to play the game nearly as well, nor would he have reached the level of temperament and insight and knowledge about the job, the people that you're working around, the town, and the American people and what they want. He gained all of that in the interim period between his first term and his second term. And so it's going to be so much more effective presidency this time around, because of all of those things, and all of those things that everybody assumed were working against him. That's why, Judge Merchan just recently, and I would have cared about this before if I thought that it was going to be relevant. I don't see how it's going to be relevant in any way, negatively at least, because he's got to know that the majority of the country is not going to be happy if he does anything to restrict his and on top of that too, Kamala Harris has already lost. So whatever kinds of conflicts he would have had based on the election, those are all gone. So it could be out of spite and revenge that he's going to do whatever he's going to do. It could be potentially just to kind of slap some kind of minor punishment on just to get this whole thing over and done with. I'm hoping that's what it is, but there's no telling with that guy being as partisan as he is as a Democrat. So, but regardless, I don't think whatever it is, it's going to do much damage. And okay, fine. We won't have to worry about, he should have just, dismissed everything outright at this point. But, if he is going to do something, okay, just do whatever you're going to do, get it over with, because Letitia James' plan, until she just got thrown off the case, was to wait 4 years to bring charges. She actually wanted to wait till Trump's term was over so that she could once again legally bring the same charges, and that was not only an incredibly unethical thing to do as a district attorney, but that is also something that I think people would have recognized as like, this is extremely excessive. There's no way you're doing this in any way to achieve any goal other than to punish a guy you have a grudge against. It's not about following the the legal system and doing what's right in terms of constitutionally. It's about seeking your revenge for somebody who you're going to blame for the embarrassment you've been feeling. I'm sorry, that's all on you, bitch. You're the one that had this grand plan of assigning your boy toy prosecutor to be on the case and be the lead prosecutor, even though he had no experience with cases like this. And you're the one who got busted with going on all these vacations with him and all this. I mean, it's just the people. One of the good things is that while they are certainly dangerous people when they wield power, when they don't, they are essentially nothing more than toddlers throwing a massive temper tantrum. And you see that all the time on mainstream media, and you see that all the time when Democrats hold a press conference. They stomp their feet and cry and whine and bitch and moan like little babies. And, you know, it is kind of satisfying, but I am getting a little annoyed with it at this point. Get the hell out of the way and let us have our country back, please. Because we're done with the games and we're done with you. So here's to hoping that we get this done. Tomorrow I won't be on, so the 6th will be the next day I'm on. And so the day that, that'd be interesting. I wonder if maybe I'll have to wait and maybe I'll think about this. I won't make any promises because I don't know what'll be going on, but maybe instead of doing my show on Monday at my normal time, maybe I'll wait until it gets around to the confirmation process if there's anything being broadcast, and I'll do the live stream while I comment on that whole spiel. So I'll think about that. Maybe I'll have to see. Maybe there'll be some kind of big news that'll happen this weekend, and I'll want to talk about it. But if not, maybe I'll let you guys know. If you guys aren't following me on X, by the way, you can find my X information on either YouTube or Rumble, wherever you're watching the video. And also, thank you guys so much for, the other day I was looking at the numbers from the video, not yesterday, obviously, but 2 days ago, and my jaw hit the floor. I was blown away by how many people. It wasn't just the viewers, it was the concurrent viewers that was really surprising to me. And thank you guys. I dropped the ball again yesterday, and I'm like I said, I told you what happened, but it's still not something I want to make as an excuse. I don't want to act like it wasn't something that I could have done better on, but still, it sucks that went down that way. But here's the point. I've been noticing that while there hasn't been any new numbers coming in for subscriptions or for follows or anything, the view count has been going back up again, and it's starting to really get to a point where I think that if I can get just one thing that give me a little bit of traction, might be able to really get a audience that would be pretty impressive. And I've said from the beginning, I wouldn't lie. I'm not going to lie. I think it's stupid when people try to act like they do this for some benevolent reason. I maybe there's some benevolent things I'd like to achieve, but ultimately my goal is to have some sort of success as a streamer and as eventually probably a podcast that leads to some monetary success. But I want it to be at the same time doing things in the way that I believe is effective and the way that I believe is how to reach people the best. I heard this quote once before. It kind of goes back to like in the movie Seven, when it says you can't tap someone on the shoulder anymore to get their attention. You got to hit them with a sledgehammer. This was by the directors of a film where it says for people to really understand the situation when with suffering in terms of presenting something to people, they've got to really feel that punch to the gut feeling, like when something really just devastates you and you get that feeling of sickness and of anger and of like not knowing what to do. And it's a great analogy because when you do have that sort of proverbial punch to the gut sort of feeling, you do know it and you do feel it, and I can relate to the feeling. So I don't necessarily want to put that in a way like I want to punch I don't want to punch all you guys in the gut, but I do hope that the way I present things is effective enough to stand out, and that it's done in a way that's unique enough and interesting enough to where you feel like you're not going to get that sort of experience anywhere else. And I know I'm a bit brash. I use a lot of bad language like a sailor, and I cuss like a sailor. But at the same time, that's me. So, and I'm not going to compromise that. But I also am not going to compromise, and I would say that it doesn't necessarily have to be through crowdfunding. I don't know what it'd be through, but I do have a Patreon set up for anybody that does want to contribute, and anything is appreciated. But at this point, I'm more concerned in growing the channel. So, as I've said many times before, I'm not the kind of guy who adopts the lingo of the call to action of smash that like button and hit the subscribe. No. We're adults here. If you like what you see, click the subscribe button or click the follow button. And if you enjoy the content, you can give it a like. I would really appreciate it, especially now because I think that going forward especially, I've started to really feel like I'm hitting the style of delivery and sequence of events that I think I really like the most. So, but as I've said, also, I'm always open to suggestion. Anybody have any requests or suggestions for the show, feel free to drop them off. I'm not going to shoot anybody down that is offering good faith advice. And most importantly, though, thank you guys. Thank you to everybody that's given the show a shot and turned up. And I know there's got to be some people out there that at least now are consistent watchers, because there's just numbers that I wouldn't know who they would be, because I've barely been able to reach anybody to tell them about the show. So whoever has been here and anybody that's been here to see the show and give it a shot, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it immensely. So, like I said, I won't be on tomorrow. I will be on Monday. I'll let you guys know ahead of time the plans for what I'll end up doing. And so you can look forward to that. But in the meantime, enjoy your Sunday. I will see you guys on Monday. Until then, take care of yourselves. Have a good afternoon or evening. And I will see you then. My name's Corey Dean. Have a good one. Peace.
Now, I can't read it. There's no words on it.
Okay. Sure.
There's no words there. To play us out. What does that mean? To play us out. What is?
For credits.
I don't know what that means. To play us out. What does that